Welcome everyone to the Slalom Supply Chain Fireside Chat. I'm your host Harshad Kanvinde, leader of Slalom's global supply chain practice. Today my guest is world-renowned supply chain expert Professor Yossi Sheffi of MIT. Professor Sheffi is the director of MIT's Center for Transportation and Logistics and a professor of engineering systems. We talk about Professor Sheffi's new book, A Shot in the Arm, which is a fascinating account of COVID-19 vaccine development and distribution, what he calls the greatest product launch in history. We also talk about agility in supply chain, role of digital transformation, changing nature of supply chain management and leadership, and a variety of other things. Professor, really great honor to have you here with me. We are going to talk about supply chain. You have had a ton of different perspective, always very deep and entertaining at points. So why don't we start with Yossi, with your, I'm really curious, your journey in supply chain, what got you excited in supply chain and what keeps you excited in supply chain?
Well, it's a long journey. Started studying actually engineering in Israel, and I came to MIT, and I studied actually transportation, which in traditional civil engineering was pavement design and foundations and stuff like this. I came to MIT, and it was much more, much more operational research and networks, and I did my PhD in networks of urban transportation networks. And I worked in this area for several years and got frustrated because I even published a book in this area on the urban transportation network. This book was not like my other books, not a management book. It was a book intended for PhD students at MIT. So it's all mathematics and models and all of this. But I got frustrated after a while because I thought I had good ideas, but this was going to politicians and no way to get this implemented. So I started working with, I had some opportunity. I started with trucking companies and implementing a lot of the same optimization, network optimization, stochastic optimization models to trucking. And lo and behold, the results were good. People were making money, and lots of companies started implementing. I started a company about do it and started doing it through my company. But from this, we grew to start looking at the shipper side, retail, work with retailers, work with manufacturers about how to deal with trucking and lots of related issues. At the same time, my research at MIT also moved from just transportation to what we call now supply chain management, basically. Procurement, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, the whole. In 92, I became the head of the Center for Transportation at MIT. And a few years afterwards, I took it in about 7-8 years afterwards. We had a program in transportation, a master program. And I decided we need master program in logistics because it's much more exciting, people more interested in all this. The faculty was not for it. They were, they had the career in traditional transportation and traffic and urban transportation and transit and stuff like this. So I took it out of civil engineering. I took the whole center out and then started independent center outside, interdepartmental center. That's, in short, it was not that quick and that fast, but started the program in logistics, which actually we're going to celebrate its 25th anniversary now. Next year, 2023 is going to be the 50th anniversary of the center and the 23rd anniversary, or the 25th anniversary of the master program. Started in logistics because I'm Master of Engineering Logistics. Now it's called Master of Supply Chain Management. But the program evolved significantly, of course, over time. I started in the late 80s to started a company. As I mentioned, some of my software that started going to company. Then I started over the years 4 other companies. All 5 of them were successful, sold to other to larger companies, acquired by larger companies. You can look on my website if you want to find out who is what and when. And of course, after you do 5 successful company, every VC in the area wants you to sit on the board and, and be with them. So I did it for a short while, but I got very frustrated with this because when the good ideas came to us, I thought I want to do it rather than just finance it.
Advice.
So, and my wife was just, that's enough. It's either me or another company. So I decided to stay with my wife, which was a good decision in retrospect. So that's about it. So meanwhile at MIT in the center, so the Master of Engineering degree, which is now the Supply Chain Management degree, was just the start. Then we have 5 centers all over the world, founded center in Colombia, in Luxembourg, in Spain, in China, in Malaysia, and we're negotiating a new center in Dubai. We have a very strong online program called MicroMasters that we have about 460,000 learners online. So it seems like we're active. We have, as I say, in addition to the masters, we have about 15 PhD students here. So it's, and as not surprising after the pandemic, the demand and the salaries are sky high for our graduates. Very high. By the way, we have 2 programs. One of them, the residential master of supply chain management, is a 10 months program, 9-10 months program. We have another program for the people who are stars who finish our online program, and they take 5 courses plus an exam. They can come to MIT and get a master in 1 semester during the spring. So we have another 40 students in the residential and 40 students in what we call the blended. They do half online and half at MIT. Right now in the spring, we are lots of students. We just finished January. In January, we have the students from all the center all around the world come here. So we have hundreds of students from all over the world, and we do a lot of activities with them. So, and we have a whole program with companies, we call supply chain exchange. We have about 50 member companies that we do a lot of activities with them. So there's a lot going on.
Lots going on. A fascinating journey, Professor. So I was going to have this interview focused on supply chain. I think I should change that and have this interview on time management. Like how do you do this? Maybe get your wife to participate in the interview as well. That so usually I have academics and industry leaders and startup founders on the call, and you are kind of a combination of all of that. 5 startups I was looking at. I'll urge my audience to also go on the website. I think there is a lot there. Half an hour is not enough. But all successful exits, as you were saying. And I was talking to someone else recently. This whole VC interest in supply chain, obviously, last 2 years have been like, we'll talk about that anomaly. And in your long career, I think getting that perspective would be interesting. But this other person I was talking to, he's also getting lots of interest from the VCs for advisory and this and that. And he's like, you know what, I mean, there is a lot of noise, a lot of interest, and the questions are so dumb from the VCs, it getting to a point where I don't want to invest my time. So I can kind of relate to that, Professor, when you say that. I think there are so many good ideas that probably it would be more interesting to just do something about it than just sitting on the sideline and advising and hope that other people will be able to fulfill the vision and realize the vision. I wanted to start with this. So yesterday I finished this book, your latest book, A Shot in the Arm.
Yeah.
For anyone who is interested in the vaccine and the marvelous things that happened like last 2 years, March 2020, starting of the lockdown to actually people getting vaccinated and the entire journey over the last 2 years. This is a really great, concise history. It goes into enough details of the science behind the vaccines, as well as the supply chain community coming to working together, and lots of collaboration, lots of partnership, and so complex. It's mind-boggling just to think about the variety of dimensions and maybe like the parts for the vaccine to actually getting government approvals and lots of government agencies around the world coming together and getting this done. You call it a moonshot or better than a moonshot, and the greatest product launch in the history. And it's not like one of the greatest. You're saying that it's the greatest product launch in the history. Let's talk about that a little bit. Why do you think the greatest product launch in the history?
Well, very few products. You have, first of all, the development, 10 months development, including, by the way, the development was 2 days. In 2 days, the companies like Moderna, which I've interviewed quite a few people in Moderna, I mean, they had the sequence. They knew what should be done. It's developing it, it's scaling it, it's getting all the approvals, getting the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. And I explain how the clinical trial works and how it's different between a vaccine and a pharmaceutical. By the way, I should just say that there was part of the book, this is my 7th book, part of the book that I just was, for me, really fun. This is understanding the science, because I am not a molecular biologist. I am not a chemist. And to me, to talk to a Nobel laureate and and the founder of Moderna and the person in BioNTech in Germany who kind of invented the whole thing,
Yep.
and they're all very open and gave me a lot of time, was just sheer joy, just to learn something entirely outside, not in my area, and not understand, just understand the magnitude of what they had to do. Now, in terms of the greatest product launch, first of all, getting to scale. That's so during the development and the testing, there was about 130 companies that were competing, and it was very hard to get the inputs to do procurement. Give you one quick example. Everybody to do the before even phase 1, phase 0 needed monkeys. They need monkeys to do experiments. Well, most of the monkeys that the world is using is coming from China, and China said we're not sending monkeys anymore because we need them for our own experiments. So there was a huge shortage of monkeys. So interestingly, a lot of the companies in the US, in Europe, banded together. And you realize that when you do an experiment, you do, let's say, half the monkey you give them placebo and half the monkey you give them the actual vaccine. So they say, but the monkeys that get placebo, we can share. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which vaccine they don't get. Right. So many companies banded together and shared the placebo monkeys. So things like this very innovative way of collaborating and sharing. And then you talk about the product that on day 1, there was demand by 5 billion people, 7 billion people. Take your on day 1. If you could have satisfied all the demand on day 1. So think about how you scale up from a laboratory to billions, not it's multiple billions, because it's more than one. And we see now we're on the 3rd, some countries are on the 4th vaccine. So how do you do billions and billions and billions of this to all parts of the globe under intense political pressure, social pressure, in this just have to do it. And it was more complicated than just any product, because it needed to be very frozen and cool. So you have to have a cold chain, and this all had to be done on the fly.
It's like, there are technical and functional challenges. Those themselves might cripple the usual supply chains, like how to the cold chain challenges, for example, and the political pressure aside, and some of these, like many of these innovations. So one thing kind of stayed with me. So this glass vial shortage, right? So glass vial and the manufacturers of the glass vials, how they are taking it on to them to not just like fulfill the demand, but because what's happening, several candidates in the development, you don't know which vaccine is going to be successful, and preventing the allocation and protecting that for only the successful candidates, because everyone knows that it's going to be a shortage scenario. So those things, people are breaking the rules, like the normal rules of
absolutely working. Breaking the rules. I mean, a supplier has to decide
Yep.
if you will be a successful or not in your R&D and your development. That's a new world, because the supplier is not actually trained to be a VC. VC try to train to say who will be successful, who will not. A supplier is not.
Exactly.
I mean, they just use their best judgment and try to give,
and as I think about the human part of it, right? So the management part of it, these are bold decisions. There is no playbook. It's like you're using your own ingenuity and your moral compass and what's right and what's wrong. So what it shows is people have that. People usually.
Sometimes I should also say that several things have been long-term development, in the sense that the science itself, several parts of the science were 30 years old. Now, part of it, they didn't come together until the last minute. But also, look at why Moderna, a company that nobody heard about until March 2020, they're a 10 or 12-year-old company. They had no product, zero, non-product. And suddenly, they were developed, they believe in mRNA. So they were already developing things for a cancer vaccine, really fascinating stuff. They are also developing, and now come to get back to some of the development, they're now developing an mRNA pharmaceutical that can rebuild heart after a heart attack. You know, the problem with the heart attack is part of the heart is being killed. I mean, just doesn't get the oxygen and dies. It can rebuild hearts. I mean, it's just science fiction what they're doing.
Amazing stuff.
But why were they able to go from 0 to billions? Once it was approved, it was about 3 or 4 months. They had to go from 0 to hundreds of millions and then billions. From day one, their lab was also their manufacturing site. They were it was all digital. We talk about the fourth manufacturing revolution. It was all digital from day one. Every part of the process collected data, brought it to a data set that automatically with AI was analyzing everything. This was all built well before they started developing vaccines. So they were really way ahead of any other company. Well, Pfizer is hundreds of times bigger than them to begin with. Well, maybe not now, but they were. So, you know, they were able, and they built the lab. It was all, things were up in the ceiling and stuff was coming down. They were able on a fly to turn the lab into the first manufacturing site. But manufacturing site at scale, which is unbelievable. And they were, by the way, in Cambridge. They're not like out there in the city. I mean, now they have other locations that are growing, of course.
But lots of collaboration for them, right? So lots of collaboration with other
collaboration. Of course, you cannot grow that fast without collaboration. But the original one they had to do on their own, and then because of the totally digital, everything was. Every process was collecting data and measuring and metrics, so they knew exactly what was going on and they controlled it perfectly. They were able, you know, one of the two companies, one is Pfizer, which is a huge company, and one is Moderna, that has no product until the vaccine. And Moderna is getting, by some estimate, just as good and sometimes even better vaccine. So it's just, I mean, the science is similar, science is the same, but there are little differences. But it's just.
So you're right, and this story plays out in not just the science and but even the supply chain collaboration, that people who were doing the right things even before COVID were at a position to take advantage or act quickly because the digital things that Moderna was doing, it had nothing to do with COVID. It was
nothing to do with COVID.
That foundation was already exactly.
They had foundations of course, of the digital foundation.
Right.
They have foundation of relationship with other companies. So the new company, they all came from other companies.
Right.
So they had relationship with a lot of companies. They did a lot of things right even before the pandemic. That's why enabled them to perform so well and respond to the pandemic.
And people often ask that, so COVID was disruptive, what's next? And no one can predict the future, but these things that Moderna didn't predict the future better. It's just that the business 101 or you need visibility in your operations, collect as much data as you possible. Digital, yeah, makes sense. So invest in that. So those kind of things, not because they are predicting COVID, it's like regardless. I think
they don't. Of course, they don't predict COVID. They were getting ready. They were getting ready to be innovative. I mean,
right.
Really, because they knew that it should be data driven, should have all the information, should make database decisions, and they did. It was so they were very successful. And of course, they hired some very good people. I mean, At the end of the day, it's also the quality of the people that can analyze the data, understand, make the right decisions.
So I think I agree that this was the greatest product launch, and people should read that book, A Shot in the Arm. This was the greatest product launch in history. Now the interesting question is all the things that we saw in last 2 years and collaboration and like small innovation, right? So not like moonshot innovation, one big bang, but lots of small things that many people across different company boundaries did. The things that we learned that work and things people were happy about kind of doing. So when people work on something that actually sees light of the day, that creates employee satisfaction to all those great things. But then will it stay? What companies are learning from it? So the way we used to think about supply chain, and this is before pandemic, that agility in supply chain matters, resiliency matters, and there is a trade-off with the cost. I mean, you can't just think about supply chain as this back-end thing that you got to keep doing, but it's more inspiring than that. Supply chain as the enabler for business growth, and visibility matters, predictability, action. I should add the collaboration as the fourth pillar that matters. But how do you build mechanics around it? What kind of things are you seeing will stay even when the urgency of the pandemic subsides? And what kind of things will just go back to normal? People won't collaborate as, or people won't innovate. People don't trust their employees to do the small innovations really. So what's coming out of this experience, Professor?
That's always when people always ask me this question, I always reminded me of one of my old professor was a earthquake engineer, and I did an MIT earthquake engineering. And every time there was an earthquake, he was in high demand. And then a year later, everybody forgot about it. I mean, he would go years with not getting a call, and suddenly people would pay anything for his expertise. At this point, look, the several things happening. First of all, the fact that it was worldwide. We never had a disruption like this to the entire economy. And there will be many changes. I mean, I think some of the big changes are to telehealth, nothing particular to do with supply chain, but the fact that you can have, a doctor in Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the leading nation hospital, give a diagnosis to somebody in Zambia. I mean, that's amazing, right? The fact that doctors can be online and much more productive rather than go to the office. But in companies general, coming back to supply chain, we see that during the pandemic, companies adopted a lot of technology very quickly. Now, many companies are looking to see what went right, what went wrong, because sometimes quick was very good. They didn't use too many lawyers, they didn't use this. And sometimes they turn out they got stuck into bad agreements. So big companies are not trying to have committees that look at what can be concluded from the pandemic that we can take forward. And we can now do it. How can we onboard, people, processes, products much more efficiently, but not become vulnerable. So companies are looking at this. I am very skeptical of the media and the politician call to the end of just in time. I'm just skeptical of this. Yeah. This is most people are calling when the politicians said, especially the left-leaning politician thinks that just in time is just a way for company to save money and get more profit. Okay, profit is of course a bad word in some segments of the population. But they don't understand that profit are the result of just in time, not the driver of just in time.
Exactly.
You do just in time, so you have better quality, lower cost, less, many better quality. So you don't have rework and you don't have warranty problem and you have good reputation for your car. So yes, the price per car will go down, but that's not what the driving force. And people cannot. I pity those companies who will now starting accumulating a lot of inventory because it will show up in product quality. Sooner or later, it will show up in product quality. And this is the kiss of death. So some of us are old enough to remember the time when the United States put quota on Japanese cars, voluntary quota, as if there's such a thing as voluntary quota, because their car was so good, they were going to drive the American out of business. Do we want to go back to this now that the product of American product are becoming a lot better because of the competition? They had to become better, and they had to use some of the Japanese manufacturing process and some of the supply chain process. They should never go back better. So there is something, however, to do things smart. In some of my latest writing blog, I give an example of Toyota. Toyota, the originator of the Toyota manufacturing system, and people call it just in time. They actually came to the pandemic with a stash of semiconductors, because after the Japanese earthquake and tsunami and nuclear disaster, they realized that out of all the products, semiconductor, they cannot increase capacity very quickly. Yeah. Because lots of reasons for the second, they cannot build new fabs, it takes years, but they just cannot increase. So they start to have inventory of just semiconductor. Everything else was no inventory, but semiconductor, they have something because of that. Yeah. And because of that, in 2021, they bypassed General Motors to be the #1 seller of US cars, of cars in the US. But it caught up with them because you can have only so much inventory. So in August 2021, they had a 40% cut in production because they could do it very nicely until they ran out of inventory.
Right.
So it's, again, telling people to have inventory was not going to solve the current problem at all. That's what people don't understand. Even
I think it's kind of maybe the human brain works this way organically. Everyone is that way, or maybe it's a media influencing, or maybe consultants are to blame as well. But it's like this 1 and 0, simplistic kind of view, just in time or no just in time. No, the reality is much more nuanced, right? So it's not.
Of course, it's much more nuanced. Of course, it's much more nuanced. And people say people will now get out of China.
Yeah, like as if there are only two options, like China or no China.
As if there are not only this. I had several discussions with journalists. It's not, you don't understand. It's not the final assembly that you get out in China. There's a whole supply chain of supply and their sub-supply and their sub-supply and material and all of this. You need to take all of this out of China.
It's not only about labor arbitrage anymore. It's not that this is cheap and as if there are options here.
By the way, companies that are working on labor arbitrage, like clothing manufacturers, are out of China already. They're in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Even Chinese companies are not in China. So because especially along the coast, prices are high. Labor prices are high. So people are in China because two big reasons. Chinese suppliers are becoming sophisticated, responsive, have capacity. That's one reason. The other reason, China is a huge market. If you want to sell in China, you want to be in China. So people are not going to just take out and leave after investing billions of dollars in building a whole Chinese supply chain and the Chinese market. Suddenly they're going to leave. There are challenges for sure. But by the way, what people don't understand, even many of the companies are leaving, are going to Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia. They're not coming to United States. So it is.
I think we all often get into these kind of discussions with the company. So agility doesn't come without its cost, right? So
of course,
flexibility, there is a cost trade-off, but that doesn't mean going after agility is not a license to just spend foolishly. And many people kind of don't grasp that. It's like When you think about, or fail fast is another example, startups and fail fast. Fail fast is not a license to fail. It's like if you fail, that's okay, and your management should take care of that. But each project team, whoever is working on that, they should not plan to fail. The failure is kind of happens inevitably. You should always plan to succeed. Same thing with agility. Like, yeah, we want flexibility, so cost is not important. No, cost is still important. Lean principles, those are still important, but keeping everything else constant. So just in time, for example, if you have just in time and you don't get things that you need in time, you don't have the just in time. You have implemented it wrong. So
not only this, it's actually interesting that if you actually look at it, very few companies are exercising true, complete just in time. I mean, they have elements of this, but very few companies are really exercising all the facets of the total manufacturing system. Because you need a lot of things in place and certain culture. Also, the whole idea of long-term view of the Toyota will have and the Americans don't, because we live quarter to quarter. So long-term investment is a problem.
I think this concept of you want agility, flexibility, responsiveness in supply chain, it's inherently messy. I mean, it's nuanced. It's not clean chevrons on a PowerPoint, and you have a agile supply chain, and then you go on a beach and sip your blue label. That doesn't happen. I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work. It's a lot of things that you need to manage really well.
And not only somehow, this, many companies have multiple supply chains.
Right.
It's not one for different product, for different, for different material, they're different supply chains, and they work under different rules. And it's much more nuanced and complex than people realize.
The challenge is when we talk to the chief supply chain officers or even anyone in the supply chain, no one says no, I don't want agility. Yeah, everyone wants agility. But then quickly, somehow, there is a camp which like want to delegate that to someone else external. Okay, get me agile supply chain, or maybe that thing new AI-based solutions. Like, no, there is no one solution. You have to roll your sleeves and work hard on it, understanding.
It's not only this. I cannot tell you how many times I talked to boards many times, participate in board discussion, inviting me, especially now supply chain becoming important. So people would ask the CEO, used to ask the CEO, what's your China strategy? Now they ask the CEO, what's your AI strategy? Or what's your blockchain strategy? I said, guys, that's not what's the problem that you're trying to solve?
Exactly.
You may be able to solve it with a spreadsheet. You don't need blockchain. I mean, the question, what's the problem? What's the easiest and quickest way to solve the problem? People look at it as you cannot start with the solution. So you cannot even ask, what's your China strategy? It's not. I have labor costs. I cannot get material. Maybe China is a solution. Maybe there are other solutions. We have to, to compare them. But it all should come from a problem. And I think a lot of it is that people are not engineers, because engineers are taught to start with a problem. And then there are all kinds of solutions, and you look at them. If you come from marketing or finance or others, I don't know, you got to get swept in the hype.
Right. It's kind of that correlation and causation confusion that many innovative. So Moderna, for example, you talked about digital foundation and whatever they're doing that helped. But I bet that Moderna didn't start with, let's do something in AI machine learning kind of.
No, of course
they started with something deeper.
No, we need all this data. We need to analyze while the process is going on.
Right.
So we cannot have a person look at it and do. So what can we do? And they started by just doing different things. They didn't even use AI. Now you're using AI, but they had a problem that they wanted to analyze a process while the process is going on, not to the many processes. So they need to do it fast.
Right.
So it started from a business problem and a need and a corporate need. And then it came to the solution.
People try to shortcut that process. I hope that someone is writing a really good case study on that Moderna digital experience and what led them to, or we should, if no one is writing, because I think that problem shows up so many times in so many of these conversations. You're talking about the board level, and we see that at the executive level as well. So I think that brings me to my next point. So agility or flexibility, responsiveness in supply chain is important, but there is just such a big noise in that field. As you said, many people are not getting over the hump of let's do something in AI, machine learning. Bunch of startups, lots of money going in. That getting people excited in supply chain, that's a great thing. No worries there. But getting people excited on the wrong things, I think that's kind of it's frustrating at times. So in your, as you talk to the boards, as you talk to startups and so on and so forth, I think like the intentions, actions, and people following their big aspirations with actions that actually work. How do you see the field today? I mean, all the players who are trying to do something in supply chain, noble goals that let's get resilient supply chain, lots of technological innovations at our disposal to use it correctly, orchestrate among that correctly. Who is doing it well? And maybe without taking any names, but what kind of characteristics you see in these leaders who are getting it right?
And look, it actually has nothing to do with this particular case. It has to do with maybe my background when I was advising VCs and my own companies and stuff. I always thought that you bet on the jockey, not on the horse. I mean, it's you look at people
Like that.
People come and say, I had all this with MIT students every year come to me, oh, you have 5 companies, and can you help us? And first of all, I try to explain the idea is nothing. It's actually 1% of the problem. Getting the team, the effort, the build out, building a product, that's, getting customers, that's the mission. But in all of this, to me, the number one thing is who is the team, the team that drive this. And sometimes you see teams that are just, they don't have, actually what happened is everybody, the first thing that they do, they get the technology team. And sometimes they neglect the knowledge of the business side. Make sure that you solve a real problem. Yep. Don't solve because you think it's a problem. Maybe 100 other people already solved it many times better. You just don't realize it.
Right.
I mean, I have example all the time. People come to me, airplanes are late. Okay, we need some structure, some algorithm for air traffic control to make sure that people. Okay, the first thing is to go and talk to one of the towers. Go and talk to Logan Airport. They have this already. They're on the 4th generation of this, and but they cannot control the weather, and they can. So I mean, come on. First, do an analysis of what it is due to weather, what it is that is unavoidable, and then see if there's really a problem there. If it's something that just because of bad management, bad process is happening, and then also think if you are all comfortable with reducing the safety standards of the FAA. I mean, okay, certainly you can get more planes if they're closer to each other. I don't want to sit in this airplane.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so think about analyze it, get some data. It's worth investing in before you start developing algorithms and find out that nobody wants them. And but as I said, the team, domain expertise, technology expertise, team with experience, team that's been there before.
Not like the bet on the jockey, not on the horse.
Bet on the jockey, not on the horse. Always bet on the, because the horse may change. Once you go, if a good team will go into this and they have a initial product, minimum viral product or whatever, and they see and they try it and it doesn't work, so they change. They go and do other things because they now get into conversation with possible customers. And so good jockeys will change where the horse is going or even replace the horse.
No, that's a great one.
But you cannot replace the jockey. The jockey is the jockey.
So now that we are talking about jockeys, you have been an educator for a long time, Yossi. So uh, multiple like generations of students, and I want to ask you this. I'm super curious that your students' interest in supply chain. Obviously, you are teaching students who are inherently interested in supply chain even before COVID started. The way the current generation of supply chain students and future leaders thinking about supply chain, are they have you seen any change? So what are they interested in? What kind of things are they learning from this last 2 years of experience?
Okay, I should say that I should turn your question around because
Okay.
it's not so much what they're interested in, it's what we think they should know. So it's a, depending on what they're interested in is very varied. I mean, we have students with a strong technology background. We have students who think that some technology infused courses are irrelevant. So we decided, but over the years, we started as a very analytical OR shop in terms of teaching, move with all the new technologies, whether the internet, algorithm, markets, and then all the new tech. But the big change that happened over the years is much more emphasis on the human, much more emphasis on relationship, on being able to work in a team, to lead a team, being able to collaborate with other in the organization, outside the organization. We actually started putting some, muscle behind it, actually trying to teach a lot of it. We have leadership courses, which we never had before. So yeah, we still do. So we do more actually. The course is loaded. The program is much more loaded, and so we still do the technology and the modeling, but and we do simply a lot. At the end, at the spring terms, there's a lot of elective courses. So we do them half a semester, so people can sample them. So we do a course on sustainability in supply chain, finance in supply chain, humanitarian logistics, omni channels, all kind of issues related to supply chains. But some of the more basic courses, first of all, there's a basic course, of course, on inventory and prediction, and the standard supply chain, forecasting, inventory, networks, all what I call standard supply chain, maybe in more advanced level, but standard supply chain. A lot of technology, more and more technology. So people now have to learn Python, have to program in Python, have to understand how to modify existing software packages, how to enter them, interact with them. We don't teach any existing software package per se, because we don't care. It's not training.
Don't care about the horse.
No, we don't. And we don't care about teaching specific software. We don't want people to come out of this knowing SAP, knowing this. Exactly. We don't care about this. Yeah. Even though some of the industry want it, we said no. We want people who can pick up SAP in a few weeks. So we have to understand the basis of how a databases work, how a machine learning works, how all of these things. You have to understand the basic how it works. Then picking up a specific piece of software it doesn't matter which specific piece of software. Now, one thing is clear that we have a huge interest in the profession. And it's not only from everywhere, men on the street, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, every week, every day has an article about supply chain management. Bloomberg now they all have the Wall Street Journal has a newsletter on supply chain every day, every morning. Bloomberg has a dispatch on supply chain every morning. So it is becoming much more recognizable, as you said before, not only cost, but revenue, customer relationship, level of service, stickiness of customer, all rely on having the product there. I mean, you can have whatever marketing, when somebody comes to the supermarket and the product is not there, or the toy store or whatever, nothing is going to help.
Doesn't matter.
They're going to choose a different product. So understanding that, and I think this may stay, in terms of things that may stay, this was a big change. I think more and more people understand the role of supply chain management. Of course, it started before the pandemic. I mean, they've started the fact that Tom Cook became CEO of Apple. He came from the supply chain.
And Amazon, I think made supply chain.
Look, Amazon is a supply chain company.
Right, exactly.
It's basically a supply chain. Well, supply chain and AWS. This is actually two companies. Technology company and supply chain company. But Mary, what was the CEO of GM also came from, Mary Barra also came from the operations track. So once you have this more visible leaders, people start seeing, first of all, it's one way to the CEO suite. And even if it's not, the CEO, you are close to the CEO. It's the CEO is to understand supply chain, understand basically what people in supply chain do, what is difficult, what is not, what can be expected, what cannot. Because there are things that only the CEO can do. If you need to go to Congress and lobby for some trade rules, well, this is a supply chain issue. You need to understand how it will help, how to know what to say, what not to say. You need to start develop understanding of what the product flow and material flow is all about.
Right, and I wish that I think this continues, and for the sake of not only the business but the society overall, because it's tied to, I think you talk about that in the book as well, but climate change, another, it's probably even more dangerous than COVID. COVID was acute pain, everyone felt it. Today, climate change, I think many people don't feel it acutely day in, day out, and it's but having the right supply chain leaders who think more holistically and not just network optimization models to get the waste out and to rethink how we consume material. I think hopefully that's going to be a key ingredient if we were to tackle climate change and the problems associated with that.
Climate change in terms of corporation is a supply chain issue, because otherwise, if you have some dirty process, you can outsource it. So now the supplier does it and you look very nice and clean. Right. That's ridiculous. You should, in order to evaluate how a company is doing, you should look at the entire supply chain. You should look from the mine, through all the suppliers, through the manufacturing, to distribution, through even reclaiming afterwards, getting back, responsible disposal. This whole chain should think about it as well. So people don't move stuff around and think that they win something. No. It's the whole thing.
So I'm really hopeful that whatever happened last 2 years and the general awareness that's increased about supply chain, things are interlinked, and it's a serious business that you got to get this right. Don't talk. Hopefully, media kind of gets on the train and figures out how to really simplify the message, not just make it simplistic. How they explain supply chain. I think that's
another thing that's taking place. More and more journalists are becoming schooled in supply chain. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had journalists calling me and say, up to a week ago I was a sports writer, now I have to write about supply chain. I'm not joking. I actually had these cases. And explain to me what is a supply chain. This was very unsatisfying interview because they could not write, anything deep or interesting. They didn't have context. So,
well, hopefully, I think we have turned a page on that. We are, as a society, we are a little better. Silver lining for last 2 years.
Absolutely.
And that stayed. So this was great talking to you, Professor. I think fascinating discussion. So thanks a lot again for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thanks again, Professor.
Thank you again. I want to thank you again.